Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bezat Hashem. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about the what we were discussing uh, what we were discussing last week about basar shenitale me'ayin, meat that wasn't always supervised or that wasn't always watched when wasn't always watched, and it was possible that a non-Jew came in uh, came into contact with it. So we were discussing also about the fact where even in a person's own home, it can be complicated. Where if they have the cleaning lady and they leave the cleaning lady alone, it could get problematic. And I'll just give you one example, unfortunate case that happened in Israel. Just it shows you the importance of always being careful what's going on. Uh, there was a restaurant, okay, a meat restaurant in Israel. I forgot where exactly it was, and there was uh, there was a girl. Okay, she went out for her birthday with some friends, and they went out to the restaurant, meat restaurant, right? Israel kosher, tudat kashgacha. It was everything was okay, and they go there, and then as they were eating dessert, the girl had a very severe allergic reaction, and she was basically rushed to the hospital. I don't remember what the outcome of that story was, but basically what happened was that the this girl
Ice
was
cream.
very allergic to milk. She was like had a very strong allergic reaction to milk, and they were surprised because it was a meat restaurant. So like they never thought to be careful about you know anything of milk because in Israel they don't mix meat and milk. And when they started looking into how this story happened, they found out that what happened was the cook, when he was looking for the desserts or when he was making the desserts, he ran out of a whipped cream. So right away he sent one of the chef's helpers, one of the boys over there. He sent them to go buy in the grocery, not too far away. He sent them to go buy whipped cream. And this guy, he wasn't really careful, right? And what he did was he brought back a dairy whipped cream. And the cook, whatever it was, I guess he didn't pay attention. He used this dairy whipped cream, and this girl ended up, in the hospital from having from eating something that she was milk that she was really allergic to in a meat restaurant that had hashgacha, which means that sometimes we can never be careful enough. Where sometimes it's just lack of knowledge that we're not sure, right? Sometimes we have products that they may seem to be kosher, and we've always remembered them to be kosher, and they they aren't. I remember that it actually happened, unfortunately, in our own shul, where there was a product that was generally is kosher, but it was ordered in a different size or in a different format. I don't know what it was, and the product that came, it looks basically the same, but that one happened not to be kosher. That one happened to not have hashgacha, as opposed to the regular one, the smaller one. I don't know what exactly it is that that is kosher. So when we leave help around in the house, we don't necessarily realize that, but sometimes they bring their own food, they have their own stuff, and they don't necessarily know that they're doing something wrong, so it happens very innocently on their part. And whatever can happen, chas v'shalom, is that a person can end up eating not kosher. So it's always important to be careful when there are when we leave our kitchen or we leave our stuff unsupervised, because we never know what can happen, aside for the actual halacha, like what we said. But this halacha is more for meat, because this was I guess the more common form of things getting mixed up. Okay. um if if it's a concept where you can easily recognize the like, if it's a kosher meat, if it's a not kosher meat, or if, like what we were saying, like you're at home, and you leave meat to be cooking on the fire, with and you leave the house and the non-Jew is there home alone, right? So if you're able to recognize that this is the piece of meat that you put in, then it's fine. There's no problem because obviously there was no switching being done. However, if you're not able to recognize the meat, you're not sure of like, okay, like what's going on here. The meat is it's very problematic. That's to put it in an easy way. You would not be allowed to technically use this meat again. Another, if we're already on the topic, Bezat Hashem, hopefully we're going to get into it more when we get there. But another thing that comes up very often is bishul goy, right? When we have these maids and we have these cleaning help in the home or live-ins or all that stuff, very often what happens is we ask them, or not even ask them, but sometimes they cook for us. It's super, super, super important to know that many times what can happen is even if they're cooking with our utensils, they're cooking with our food, they're not touching anything, they're not doing anything. Sometimes they can make the entire food that is cooked not kosher and the pot that was used also not kosher. Meaning, let's say, pasta. Okay, pasta is something. Uh, yeah, pasta is something that cannot be eaten raw. Okay, it's something that is respectable, that is served on a, I guess you can say, king's table. If a non-Jewish help were to put up a pot of pasta, kosher, the pot now that was used can become not kosher or is not kosher. Okay, the pasta that was cooked is not kosher, unless, of course, it was the Jew that turned on, unless it was the Jew that turned on the fire, at least, and technically, even for Sfaradim, if that happened by mistake, so then we can let it pass, I guess. But it's important to know that many times, and people do this, where the cleaning help is the one that basically puts up supper. She's the one that makes the food. It's important to know that if something like that happens, it again, unless if the certain conditions are met, many times the food can become not kosher and then the pots become not kosher, which means that afterwards you would have to go through the whole koshering process of the whole koshering process of
When
making it kosher
pot
again.
does not become, when the pot is not kosher, when what?
So if the if the non-Jew cooked
She didn't turn
with
on
your pot,
the
okay,
fire.
if they turned on the fire and they were the ones that did everything. Now it's not everything that's not allowed. There are two conditions. There are two conditions. One, which is it has to be something that cannot be eaten raw. So let's say, for example, we have matbucha, right? Matbucha, salad crete in French, is something that's made from basically tomatoes, right? Tomatoes, peppers, garlic, whatever it is. All of those ingredients are ingredients that can be eaten raw. So since they're able to be eaten raw, if the non-Jew cooks them for us, we don't care because it's able to be eaten raw. That's one that's one condition. The second condition is if it's something that is would be served on a king's table. Okay, meaning um, popcorn, for example. Okay, the kernels cannot be eaten raw, but on the other hand, I don't think so. At least uh, popcorn wouldn't be necessarily served on a king's table. Right? It's not respectable. So it has to be two things. It has to be something that cannot be eaten raw, and it also has to be something that is not would not be going on a king's table. If you have those two conditions, then there's no problem of bishulakum. They can technically cook it. Okay, um, but if it has none of those, meaning it's something that cannot be eaten raw, and it's something that is served on a king's table, right? Something respectable. So then there is a problem of bishul goy, and if they cooked in it, they would you wouldn't be allowed to, um, or you would have to kosher the pots. There are some leniencies, but if there are, each one should, I guess, reach out to their rabbi uh, concerning this. This is especially true and especially problematic when you have um, uh, elderly help, meaning there are some people that, when they're already very old, they can't do things on their own, so they have people that come to help them in their house. It's more, it happens here too, but especially in Israel, you have a lot of these things where it's literally the old man or the old lady just with their helper, and she's not able to get up and cook or do anything, so the lady does it for her. Again, something like that uh would need to be consulted by a rabbi, how to proceed with something like that. Okay. We also mentioned briefly last week that when when we're sending packages or a food, right? Many times you want to, or it happens often enough that you want to send food in an Uber. You want to send food in Uber to someone, your kid is learning in the yeshiva or something like this, and you cooked some food for them, or even you just, for Shabbat, you want to send some food over in an Uber. What you would have to make sure is you would have to make sure that you technically like double seal whatever is being sent. So what people do is they close it with a special lid of the pan or whatever it is, and then on top of that they put this special scotch tape. It's like what we mentioned last week about the restaurants when they always staple the bag closed, and then they put those stickers of the ORB or the KM to show that it's been double sealed. And this is actually what's required in order to avoid this problem of basar shenitale min ha'ain. Okay. Um, Technically speaking, when let's say, I've come across this before, where sometimes the cleaning help in the home, so they're briefed by the owners, or they're briefed by the people that they have to use their own utensils if they want to cook, right? So technically speaking, uh, you can even have them being cooked one next to each other. The only problem is you'd have to make sure that they're covered. Okay, you'd have to make sure that they're covered in order that one shouldn't like possibly fit into the other one, and we're not afraid of them being confused unless the food is actually very similar and one is kosher food, the other is not kosher food. Then you would not be allowed to cook them one next to each other. Okay. Um, for the same reason, you would have to be careful also with, even if it's not being cooked, but if you're placing it next to each other. So you're placing it in the same fridge, right? Technically speaking, there's no problem of placing it in the same fridge. There's nothing going on. There's no mixture going on, but you would have to be careful, and you'd have to use um, common sense to see if it would be possible to confuse the two. So you'd have to be careful. You'd have to be careful with that. Okay. Um, it's important that the non-Jews should also know this concept. The non-Jew that's working at home should know this concept of kosher. They should be explained it. So this way they should be careful of it, and then technically they would also be afraid of not going against your kosher diet, because if they were to do that, they know that they can possibly lose their job. So they would be extra careful. That would help them be more careful about not mixing the two. Okay. Um, if a person is sending fish, right? So that would also technically, it's not only limited to actual meat. They would also need to send the fish. However, if the fish is whole, okay, or even if you have like half a fillet, you have a piece of the fillet that you can see and you can notice that it's a kosher fish, then it would be okay. This brings us a little bit to a topic which I'm sure many have asked or thought about, would be would be buying fish from not kosher stores. Okay, would you be allowed to go to Publix? Would you be allowed to go to Costco and buy obviously kosher fish? But would you be allowed to buy fish over there? Why? Because maybe, and it's very possible, that they're using the knives to cut the not kosher fish together with the kosher fish, right? So, would that be allowed or not be allowed? It's important to know that before anything, before we even get into the details of how it would be allowed, it's important to know that if you would want to buy fish at such a store, it would have to be technically with the scales on. Meaning you want to buy a fillet, no problem. As long as you see the piece of fish having scales, right? You see the scale, and then afterwards you can ask them to skin it for you. That's not a problem. But as long as from the process, from the moment of after it was skinned till it gets into your hands, it wasn't not supervised, then you can buy it. Okay, so for example, if you want to buy salmon in Costco, right? You come to Costco, you see the fish. It says salmon on it, but there's no skin. Can you buy it? The answer in specific, only for salmon, would be yes. Only for salmon you would be allowed. If it would be other fish, if there's no skin on, you would not be able to buy it, and you would have to go to them in the kitchen or wherever it is and tell them, can I have this piece of fish? Can I see the fish? Okay, now skin it for me. Then you would be allowed to use it. Otherwise, you would not be allowed to buy fish. Sorry?
I thought the Sephardim were allowed to buy, no Ashkenazim, but Sephardim, they're allowed to buy any fish.
Very good. So in general, we shouldn't buy fish with the exception of salmon, because salmon is very unique. But with the exception of salmon, you should not be buying fish without the skin on from a not kosher place.
At least even Ashkenazim I know, but I thought Sephardim they didn't.
Yeah. Even for Sephardim, you shouldn't be buying it without the skin. And then another important thing is after you buy it and after you get it, you make sure to rinse and to rub off the salmon or whatever it is being used before you actually start using it. Why do we need to do that? Because like we said, maybe they are cutting with not kosher knife or not kosher, I guess you can say not kosher knives. They're cutting this fish. So in order to avoid any residue, any like possibly like fat that was from the not kosher fish that was now used, that was on the knife and was stuck to the knife when you cut the kosher fish. So in order to avoid that problem, when you rinse it off, it's okay. And again, this is only because the knives that are being used are cold. And Bezod Hashem, when we get further in, we're going to see the differences between cold and hot and all that stuff. But for now, again, since the knife is cold, the food is cold, everything is cold, there wouldn't be a problem. The only problem would be a little bit of residue. So in that case, it would be just enough to rinse and to rub off the fish. Even if it was cut, even if it was cut with a not kosher knife, that would be the solution. So like we said, you can buy the fish, you can buy you can buy the kosher fish in a not kosher store, as long as the knives that are being used are not used for hot, they're used for cold. And then you have them skin it in front of you. And then when you get home, you also make sure to rinse it off. That would be the way to buy fish at a not kosher store. And that's what we said also, that a person should, even when it comes to fish, if you would send fish as is in a taxi, Uber, or whatever it is, or even you just leave it at home, you would have to be careful with that double seal, or to make sure that it shouldn't get mixed up. Okay. Bezat Hashem, we'll stop here for today.
Thank you so much.
Bezat Hashem, next week.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Enrico.
Besimcha. Bye bye.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom. Bye bye.